What would you do if the man you traveled 2,000 miles to marry turned out to be a monster? When refined Boston teacher Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore answers a mail-order bride advertisement, she expects to find love and security in the Wyoming frontier. Instead, she discovers a nightmare that will test every ounce of courage she possesses. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, in the form of a lonely cowboy with gentle hands and a broken heart. This is a story of second chances, healing love, and the courage to fight for happiness against impossible odds. If you love stories of romance redemption in the untamed American West, you're going to want to hear every word of this incredible journey. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that will touch your heart and transport you to another time and place. Mail order bride escapes. Evil businessman finds true love with lonely widowed cowboy in Wyoming. The letter trembled in Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore's gloved hands as she read it for the 100th time. The autumn wind whistled through the broken window of her cramped Boston tenement, carrying with it the acrid smell of factory smoke and human desperation. Around her, the sparse furniture that remained after the creditor's last visit seemed to mock her genteel upbringing. Seeking refined lady for companionship and marriage, the letter read in elegant script. Successful businessman in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory desires educated wife to share comfortable life. References available. Serious inquiries only. Miss Thornfield. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember when her life had taken such a devastating turn. Just 6 months ago, she had been Miss Whitmore, respected teacher at the Beacon Hill Academy for Young Ladies. She had possessed a modest inheritance, a respected position, and the quiet dignity that came with independence. Now at 28, she faced the stark reality of homelessness and starvation. The factory accident that claimed her father's life had revealed the truth about their family's finances. What she had believed to be a secure inheritance had been lost years earlier to her uncle's gambling addiction. The academy, suffering its own financial difficulties, could no longer afford to employ her. Within months, she had gone from comfortable respectability to sharing a single room with 3 other destitute women in the worst part of the city. But it was not her own suffering that drove her to consider such a desperate measure as answering a mail-order bride advertisement. It was the knowledge that winter was coming, and she had watched too many women like herself simply disappear. The streets of Boston were littered with the dreams of the unfortunate, and Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore refused to become another casualty of circumstance. She smoothed the letter against her worn skirt and reached for her pen. Whatever lay ahead in Wyoming territory had to be better than what awaited her here. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood on the platform of the Cheyenne depot, her small carpet bag clutched in her hands and her heart hammering against her ribs. The journey west had been arduous, but her excitement had sustained her through the long days and uncomfortable nights. Mr. Thornfield's subsequent letters had painted a picture of a cultured gentleman who appreciated literature and intelligent conversation. His photograph showed a distinguished man with kind eyes and an honest smile. The reality that greeted her bore no resemblance to her expectations. Miss Whitmore. The voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Sarah turned to see a man approaching her, but this was not the gentleman from the photograph. This man was younger, harder, with calculating eyes that stripped away her composure with a single glance. His expensive suit and diamond stickpin spoke of wealth, but there was something predatory in his manner that made her instinctively step backward. "I am Marcus Thornfield," he said, though every instinct she possessed screamed that this was a lie. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Mr. Thornfield," Sarah's voice wavered despite her efforts to maintain control, "but you look nothing like your photograph." Marcus's smile was cold as a Wyoming winter morning. "Photographs can be deceiving, my dear, as can many things. Come, I have a carriage waiting." Sarah hesitated, but what choice did she have? She had spent her last dollar on the train ticket west. She was hundreds of miles from anything familiar in a territory where women like her had little protection and fewer options. With growing dread, she followed Marcus to an elaborate carriage that seemed out of place in the rough frontier town. The Cheyenne of 1885 was a mixture of permanent buildings and temporary structures, a town caught between its railroad boom origins and its aspirations towards civilization. Cowboys and railroad workers mingled with merchants and their wives on the dusty streets. It should have been exciting, this first glimpse of the frontier. Instead, Sarah felt only a growing sense of entrapment. "I trust you will find our arrangement satisfactory," Marcus said as the carriage rolled through the town. His tone suggested that her satisfaction was of little concern to him. "Arrangements?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "We shall be married immediately, of course. I have taken the liberty of making the necessary preparations." Marcus's smile never reached his eyes. "I trust you have no objections." "But surely we should take time to become acquainted," Sarah protested. "Your letter suggested a courtship period." "My dear Miss Whitmore, you are hardly in a position to make demands. You answered my advertisement seeking marriage, and marriage you shall have. The ceremony is scheduled for this evening." The carriage stopped before the Cattleman's Hotel, the finest establishment in Cheyenne. Marcus handed her down with mock courtesy, but his grip on her arm was firm enough to bruise. Sarah found herself propelled into an elegant lobby, up a carpeted staircase, and into a suite of rooms that would have impressed her under any other circumstances. "You will prepare yourself for the ceremony," Marcus instructed, gesturing toward the bedroom. "I have taken the liberty of selecting appropriate attire." He indicated a white dress laid out on the bed, beautiful but somehow ominous in its perfection. "Mr. Thornfield, please," Sarah began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "It is Marcus, my dear, and you would do well to understand your situation. You are hundreds of miles from home with no money and no prospects. You can become my wife with all the comfort that entails, or you can find yourself on the street with the other unfortunates. The choice, as they say, is yours." Alone in the room, Sarah sank onto the bed beside the white dress and fought back tears of frustration and fear. How had she so badly misjudged the situation? The Marcus Thornfield who had written those thoughtful letters bore no resemblance to the cold, calculating man who now held her fate in his hands. She moved to the window and looked out at the busy street below. Cowboys rode past their horses, kicking up small clouds of dust. Respectable women in their neat dresses moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces set with the determined optimism of frontier wives. Somewhere out there was the life she had dreamed of. Honest work, genuine companionship, perhaps even love. Instead, she was trapped in a cage of silk and velvet, about to be bound to a man who regarded her as little more than property. The sound of footsteps in the outer room announced Marcus's return. Sarah straightened her shoulders and tried to gather what remained of her courage. She was Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, daughter of a Harvard professor, educated and intelligent. She would find a way out of this situation. But first she had to understand exactly what kind of trap she had walked into. That evening, in a private ceremony witnessed only by the hotel manager, and a woman Sarah suspected was not the respectable matron she pretended to be, Sarah found herself married to Marcus Thornfield. The justice of the peace was clearly accustomed to such arrangements, for he asked no questions and accepted Marcus's generous payment without comment. "Now, my dear wife," Marcus said as they returned to the suite, "we can discuss your new circumstances more freely." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would be more terrible than she had imagined. Marcus poured himself a whiskey and settled into a chair by the fire. "My business interests are diverse, Miss Whitmore. I own several establishments in Cheyenne and other frontier towns, saloons, gambling halls, and entertainment venues." Sarah's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. Entertainment venues. "Come now, you cannot be so naive. Men have needs, my dear, and I provide for those needs. My establishments employ many young women, some of whom arrived in circumstances very similar to your own." Marcus's smile was pure malice. Answering advertisements, seeking husbands, finding themselves disappointed in their expectations. "You mean you—" Sarah could not finish the sentence. "I collect them, yes. Young women with few options and no one to miss them. Marriage provides certain legal protections for my business practices, you understand. A wife cannot testify against her husband, and wives who disappear. Well, such things happen on the frontier." Sarah felt the walls of the elegant room closing in around her. "The other women who answered your advertisements are earning their keep in various ways, some in my saloons, some in my more specialized establishments. You, my dear, with your education and refinement, will serve a different purpose. You will be the respectable face of my empire, the dignified wife who legitimizes my operations." "And if I refuse," Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. then you will discover that there are many ways for a woman to disappear in Wyoming territory. Mining accidents. Indian raids simple misfortune. The frontier is dangerous, particularly for women who make poor choices. That night, locked in the bedroom of the suite, Sarah paced the confines of her prison and tried to think. Marcus had been clear about her options, compliance or death, but surely there had to be another way. She was intelligent, resourceful, and despite her current circumstances, not without courage. She examined the window, but it was too high and faced a busy street where any escape attempt would be immediately noticed. The door was locked from the outside, and she could hear Marcus moving about in the outer room. He had made it clear that any attempt to flee would result in consequences she was not prepared to face. But as she sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Cheyenne settling into night, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore made herself a promise. She would not become another victim of Marcus Thornfield's schemes. Somehow, someway, she would find her freedom. She did not yet know that salvation would come in the form of a lonely rancher with gentle hands and a wounded heart. She did not know that her greatest trial would become the foundation of her greatest happiness. All she knew was that she would not surrender her dignity or her hope, no matter what tomorrow might bring. Outside her window, the stars shone down on the frontier town with the same light that had guided countless souls to new lives in the American West. Sarah pressed her face to the glass and made a wish on those distant suns. A wish for courage, for strength, and for the chance to find the life she had dreamed of when she first decided to answer that fateful advertisement. The next morning brought no immediate relief, but it did bring an opportunity to observe Marcus's true nature more clearly. He was charming when it suited his purposes, but beneath the veneer of respectability lay something cold and calculating. As they breakfasted in the hotel dining room, Sarah noticed how other patrons regarded him, with a mixture of fear and reluctant respect that spoke of his reputation in the community. "Today, you will accompany me as I conduct business," Marcus informed her over coffee and eggs. "It is important that you be seen as my devoted wife. Your reputation will reflect on mine and mine on my enterprises." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was both command and threat. As they prepared to leave the hotel, she caught sight of herself in the lobby mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the hopeful bride who had arrived in Cheyenne just 2 days earlier. Her eyes held a wariness that had not been there before, and her posture spoke of barely contained desperation. But there was something else in her reflection, something that Marcus Thornfield had not yet managed to extinguish. It was the look of a woman who had not yet surrendered, who was still fighting, even when the odds seemed impossible. Their first stop was the Silver Dollar Saloon, Marcus's flagship establishment. As they entered through the bat-wing doors, Sarah was struck by the contrast between the elegant facade and the sordid reality within. Even in the morning hours, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of stale liquor. Women in garish dresses and painted faces moved among the tables, their eyes holding the same desperate wariness that Sarah felt in her own heart. "Ladies," Marcus announced to the room, "I would like you to meet my wife, Mrs. Thornfield." The reaction was immediate and telling. Some of the women looked surprised, others resigned, but all of them understood what Sarah's presence meant. She was both a symbol of Marcus's power and a warning of what could happen to any woman who found herself in his web. As they moved through the saloon, Marcus introduced Sarah to his various employees and associates. Each introduction reinforced the message that she was his property, his prize, and his means of projecting respectability onto his sordid enterprises. Sarah smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, but inside she was cataloging every detail, every face, every possible avenue of escape. It was during this tour that she first noticed him. He stood at the bar, a tall man in dusty range clothes with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Unlike the other men in the saloon, he seemed uncomfortable in the environment, as if he had business to conduct, but took no pleasure in the surroundings. When Marcus introduced her, the stranger's eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw something there that had been absent from every other face she had encountered since her arrival. Genuine concern. "Jake Harrison," Marcus said with barely concealed irritation. "One of our local ranchers. Mr. Harrison, my wife." Jake touched his hat brim in polite acknowledgement, but Sarah noticed that his handshake was brief and his manner cool toward Marcus. When their eyes met again, she saw a question there, as if he sensed something wrong, but was not yet certain what. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Jake said, and his voice was as warm and honest as his eyes. For the first time since her arrival in Cheyenne, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "Mr. Harrison runs a small spread north of town," Marcus explained dismissively. "Cattle and such, nothing that would interest a refined lady such as yourself." But Sarah was more interested than Marcus could possibly imagine. Here was a man who looked at her as if she were a person rather than property, who carried himself with the quiet dignity of honest work, who seemed to represent everything she had hoped to find in the West. The moment passed quickly, and Marcus hustled her away to continue their rounds. But as they left the Silver Dollar, Sarah found herself looking back over her shoulder, catching one last glimpse of Jake Harrison's concerned expression. That afternoon, as Marcus conducted business in his various establishments, Sarah began to understand the full scope of his empire. He owned not just saloons but gambling dens, a brothel disguised as a boarding house, and several other ventures that existed in the gray areas of frontier law. He was careful to maintain relationships with local officials, and Sarah noticed how often money changed hands during their visits. But she also noticed something else: the fear. Despite his wealth and influence, Marcus Thornfield was not beloved. He was tolerated, accommodated, perhaps even respected for his power, but he was not trusted or liked. There was an undercurrent of resentment wherever they went, a sense that people were waiting for him to make a mistake that would bring him down. This observation gave Sarah her first glimmer of hope. If Marcus had enemies, perhaps she could find allies. If his empire was built on fear rather than genuine loyalty, perhaps it was not as stable as it appeared. That evening, back in their suite, Marcus outlined his expectations for their marriage in terms that made Sarah's skin crawl. She was to be the perfect wife in public, beautiful, refined, devoted. In private, she was to be silent and compliant. Any deviation from this script would result in consequences that he described in detail, making it clear that other women had learned these lessons the hard way. "Do we understand each other, my dear?" Marcus asked, his voice silk-wrapped around steel. "Perfectly," Sarah replied, though inside she was already making plans. As Marcus slept that night, Sarah lay awake and thought about Jake Harrison's storm-gray eyes and the way he had looked at her with genuine concern. Somewhere beyond the walls of her prison, there were still good men in the world. Somehow she would find a way to reach them. The opportunity came sooner than she had dared to hope. 3 days into her nightmare marriage, Sarah was accompanying Marcus on his rounds when they encountered Jake Harrison again. This time the meeting was not accidental. Jake was waiting outside the Silver Dollar, his horse tied to the hitching post, his expression grim with purpose. "Thornfield," Jake said, touching his hat to Sarah before fixing Marcus with a steady stare. "We need to talk." "About what, Harrison?" Marcus's voice carried its usual edge of irritation, but Sarah detected something else beneath it: wariness. "About the water rights you're claiming on Willow Creek. That's been open range for 20 years, and my cattle depend on that water." Marcus shrugged dismissively. "Perhaps you should have filed proper claims when you had the chance. The law favors those who act decisively." Sarah watched the exchange with growing interest. Jake Harrison's jaw was tight with controlled anger, but his voice remained level and reasonable. "The law favors those with the best of lawyers and the most money, you mean. But there's another kind of law out here, Thornfield. The kind that says a man doesn't steal what his neighbors need to survive." "Are you threatening me, Harrison?" Marcus stepped closer, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun at his hip. Jake's expression never changed, but something in his stance shifted, and suddenly the quiet rancher looked like a man who could handle whatever trouble came his way. "Just stating facts. You take that water, and I'll have no choice but to find legal remedies. Could get expensive for both of us." It was then that Sarah made her decision. As the two men faced each other in the dusty street, she deliberately stumbled, crying out in apparent distress as she fell to her knees. Both men immediately moved to help her, but it was Jake who reached her first, his strong hands gentle as he helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" His voice was filled with genuine concern, and his touch was careful and respectful. "I believe I may have turned my ankle," Sarah said, allowing herself to lean slightly against his supporting arm. "How clumsy of me." In that brief moment of contact, she managed to press a small piece of paper into his palm. Years of discreet note-passing during boring faculty meetings had taught her the skill of such subtle communication. Jake's eyes flickered with surprise, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Perhaps I should escort Mrs. Thornfield back to the hotel," Jake suggested to Marcus. "Make sure she's not seriously injured." Marcus's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he could hardly refuse such a reasonable offer without appearing ungentlemanly. "Very well, but be quick about it. My wife requires rest." As they walked slowly toward the hotel, Sarah leaning on Jake's arm, with apparent necessity, she could feel the tension radiating from the man beside her. He had clearly sensed that something was wrong from their first meeting, but now he had confirmation that his suspicions were correct. "Your ankle seems to be improving remarkably," Jake observed quietly as they neared the hotel entrance. "Yes, it appears the injury was not as severe as I first thought," Sarah replied, her voice carrying just enough volume to satisfy any observers while conveying a different message entirely. At the hotel entrance, Jake helped her up the steps with careful courtesy. "I hope you feel better soon, Mrs. Thornfield," he said, his voice formal, but his eyes promising that he had received her message. That evening, Marcus questioned her closely about the encounter, his suspicion obvious. Sarah maintained her story about the turned ankle and praised Jake's gentlemanly assistance, all while projecting the grateful innocence of a rescued lady. Marcus seemed partially satisfied, but she noticed that he watched her more closely for the rest of the evening. The note she had passed to Jake was brief but desperate. "Help me. Not willing wife. Prisoner. SEW." She had no way of knowing if he would believe her or if he would act on her plea. All she could do was wait and hope that her instincts about his character were correct. 2 nights later, her faith was rewarded. Sarah had been locked in her room as usual, listening to Marcus conducting business with several of his associates in the outer chamber. Their voices carried clearly through the door, discussions of shipments, territories, and profits that confirmed everything she had suspected about the true nature of Marcus's empire. It was nearly midnight when she heard the soft tapping at her window. Her heart leaped with hope and terror in equal measure. Either salvation had arrived or Marcus was testing her loyalty in the cruelest possible way. Moving carefully to the window, she peered into the darkness and saw Jake Harrison balanced on the narrow ledge, outside a coil of rope around his shoulder, and determination written across his features. "Can you climb?" he whispered as she fumbled with the window latch. "I can try," Sarah whispered back, though her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the mechanism. "There's a ledge about 10 feet down," Jake explained quickly. "I'll lower you to it, then we can make it to the alley. Do you trust me?" Sarah looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw the same honest concern that had given her hope during their first meeting. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I trust you." The next few minutes were the most terrifying of Sarah's life. Despite her education and refinement, she had never been a particularly physical person, and the thought of climbing down the side of a building in a long skirt seemed impossible. But desperation gave her strength, and Jake's calm instructions and steady presence gave her courage. Inch by terrifying inch, they made their way down the side of the hotel. Sarah's muscles screamed with effort, her hands burned from gripping the rope, and her heart hammered so loudly she was certain it would wake the entire town. But Jake was there every step of the way, his voice calm and reassuring, his movements sure and confident. When her feet finally touched the ground in the dark alley behind the hotel, Sarah's legs nearly gave out from relief and exhaustion. Jake caught her as she swayed, his arms strong and steady around her trembling form. "Easy," he murmured. "You did fine. Better than fine. You were brave as anything." For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to rest against his chest, drawing strength from his solid warmth. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong, could smell the clean scents of leather and horses and honest work that clung to his clothes. It was the first time in days that she had felt truly safe. "We need to go," Jake said gently. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Sarah answered, though it had been years since she had been on horseback. Jake's horse was waiting at the mouth of the alley along with a smaller mare that he explained belonged to his daughter. "She won't mind lending her to someone in need," he assured Sarah as he helped her into the saddle. As they rode out of Cheyenne in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah felt a mixture of overwhelming relief and terrifying uncertainty. She was free of Marcus Thornfield's immediate control, but she was also fleeing into an unknown wilderness with a man she barely knew. Her entire future now rested in the hands of a quiet rancher whose motivations she could only hope to understand. "Where are we going?" she asked as the lights of Cheyenne faded behind them. "My ranch," Jake replied simply. "It's about 20 miles north. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next. Safe. The word seemed almost foreign to Sarah after the past few days, but as she looked at Jake's profile in the pale starlight, she began to believe it might be possible. The ride to Jake's ranch took them through country that would have taken Sarah's breath away under different circumstances. Rolling hills covered in tall grass stretched away in all directions, broken by stands of cottonwood and willow along the creek beds. The sky above them was vast and star-filled, so different from the narrow slice of heaven visible between Boston's buildings. But Sarah was too exhausted and overwhelmed to fully appreciate the beauty around her. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the escape was fading, leaving her weak and shaking in the saddle. Jake seemed to sense her condition, for he kept their pace easy and stopped frequently to check on her welfare. Not much further now, he assured her as they crested a low hill. See those lights? That's home. Home. The word struck Sarah with unexpected force. For so many years, home had been whatever rented room she could afford, whatever school would employ her, whatever situation offered the promise of security. She had almost forgotten what it meant to belong somewhere. The Harrison Ranch was not grand by any standards, but it radiated the kind of solid prosperity that came from hard work and careful management. The main house was a simple two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that spoke of evening conversations and quiet contemplation. Outbuildings were well maintained, corrals were sturdy, and everything bore the mark of a man who took pride in his work. As they approached the house, the front door opened and a small figure emerged onto the porch. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see that it was a child, a girl of perhaps 8 or 9 years, with her father's dark hair and a serious expression far too mature for her age. "Papa?" The child called out, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and worry. "I heard horses." "It's all right, Emma," Jake replied as he dismounted. "I've brought a guest, someone who needs our help." Emma Harrison studied Sarah with the frank curiosity of childhood, but her expression remained guarded. Sarah could see wariness in those young eyes, and something that looked almost like resignation. This was a child who had learned not to expect too much from strangers. "This is Mrs. Jake paused, realizing he knew Sarah by only her married name. "Whitmore," Sarah said quickly. "Sarah Whitmore." She would not carry Marcus Thornfield's name any longer than absolutely necessary. Jake helped Sarah down from her horse, his hands gentle but impersonal. She was grateful for his restraint. After Marcus's possessive handling, even kind touches felt overwhelming. "Emma, would you help Mrs. Whitmore get settled in the spare room?" Jake asked his daughter. "She's had a difficult few days and needs rest." Emma nodded solemnly and led Sarah into the house. The interior was as honest and comfortable as the exterior. Simple furniture built to last, braided rugs on polished wood floors, and the kind of cleanliness that spoke of regular care rather than hired help. "This was Mama's sewing room," Emma explained as she showed Sarah to a small but comfortable bedroom. "Papa made it into a guest room after. Sarah heard the wealth of pain behind that simple word and felt her heart go out to the serious little girl. "Thank you, Emma. This is perfect." Emma lingered in the doorway for a moment, studying Sarah with those two old eyes. "Are you going to stay?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "I hope so, at least for a while." Emma nodded as if this was the answer she had expected. "Most people don't stay," she said matter-of-factly. "But Papa helps them anyway." After Emma left, Sarah sank onto the narrow bed and allowed herself to truly comprehend what had happened. She was free. After days of imprisonment and terror, she was actually free. The relief was so overwhelming that she began to shake great silent sobs that she muffled against the quilt that smelled of sunshine and honest work. Outside her window, she could hear Jake moving around the barn, settling the horses, and securing the ranch for the night. The sounds were peaceful and purposeful, the sounds of a man who knew his place in the world and took pride in his responsibilities. For the first time since leaving Boston, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore allowed herself to hope that she might find her place in the world as well. The next morning brought Sarah's first real look at the Harrison Ranch in daylight, and what she saw impressed her more than any of Marcus Thornfield's ostentatious displays of wealth. This was a working ranch built by a man who understood the value of honest labor and careful planning. Jake was already at work when Sarah emerged from the house, repairing a section of fence, while Emma helped by sorting nails and offering the kind of cheerful chatter that seemed to be her way of dealing with the world. Father and daughter worked together with the easy rhythm of long practice, and Sarah could see the deep bond between them. "Good morning," Jake called out when he noticed her. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in days," Sarah replied truthfully. The simple bed in the spare room had been more comfortable than the luxurious suite at the Cheyenne Hotel, simply because she had been able to sleep without fear. Emma looked up from her nail sorting with renewed curiosity. "Are you really from Boston?" she asked. "Papa says that's a very big city." "It is indeed," Sarah confirmed, settling on the fence rail near the child. "Very big and very different from this. Buildings so tall you can barely see the sky, and more people than you could count in a lifetime." "Did you like it there?" Emma asked, her serious eyes studying Sarah's face. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Parts of it. I liked teaching school and going to the library and the symphony, but I didn't like feeling closed in all the time. And I didn't like the way people could be so close together and yet so lonely." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "I wouldn't like that either. I like being able to see the whole sky." As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life. When Jake mentioned that one of his cattle was having difficulty with a breached birth, Sarah surprised him by offering to help. Her experience as a teacher had given her some familiarity with emergency situations, and she had assisted the local doctor on more than one occasion during her years in Boston. "I'm not squeamish," she assured Jake when he hesitated, "and an extra pair of hands might be useful." The next hour tested Sarah's claim about not being squeamish, but it also revealed reserves of strength and competence that surprised even her. Working alongside Jake to save both cow and calf, she felt more useful and valued than she had in months. When they finally succeeded in delivering a healthy calf, Jake's smile of appreciation was worth all the discomfort and mess. "Thank you," he said simply. "I couldn't have managed that alone." It was the beginning of a new understanding between them. Over the following days, as Sarah recovered from her ordeal and adjusted to ranch life, she and Jake began to see each other as partners rather than rescuer and victim. Sarah proved adept at ranch bookkeeping, organizing Jake's financial records with the same methodical approach she had once applied to lesson plans. She helped Emma with her reading and arithmetic, teaching the child with the patience and skill that had made her a successful teacher. She learned to cook for ranch hands, to tend kitchen gardens, and to handle the dozens of small tasks that kept a frontier household running. But it was in the quiet evening hours after Emma had gone to bed and the ranch work was done that the real connection between Sarah and Jake began to develop. Sitting on the front porch and watching the sun set over the Wyoming hills, they shared stories of their past lives and their hopes for the future. Jake told her about his late wife Mary and the devastating blow her departure had dealt to his faith in love and family. Mary had been restless from the beginning of their marriage, yearning for the excitement of city life, and increasingly resentful of the isolation and hard work that ranch life demanded. "I thought if I could give her everything she wanted, she'd be happy," Jake said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Better house, finer clothes, trips to Denver and Chicago." But it was never enough. She wanted something I couldn't give her. A different life entirely. Sarah learned that Mary had left on a winter morning while Jake was helping a neighbor with a difficult calving. She had taken not only her personal belongings, but also the ranch's emergency fund, money that Jake had saved for years to protect against drought or disease or market crashes. Emma found the note. Jake continued, his voice heavy with old pain. "She was so young, but she understood that her mama wasn't coming back. I think that's when she started building walls, protecting herself from getting hurt again." "And you," Sarah asked gently, "did you build walls too?" Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Higher than Emma's, I'm afraid. I told myself it was better to be alone than to risk that kind of pain again." Sarah understood that pain in ways that Jake was only beginning to suspect. Her own romantic disappointments, while different in nature, had left similar scars. The fiancé who had abandoned her when her inheritance disappeared, the colleagues who had treated her with condescension rather than respect, the gradual erosion of hope that had led her to answer Marcus Thornfield's advertisement in the first place. "Perhaps," Sarah said carefully, "walls serve their purpose for a time. They protect us while we heal. But eventually, don't they become prisons of their own?" Jake turned to look at her, then really look at her, and Sarah felt something shift between them. The careful politeness and grateful obligation that had characterized their interactions began to transform into something deeper and more dangerous. "What are we doing here, Sarah?" Jake asked, his voice rough with an emotion she was only beginning to recognize. Sarah met his gaze, steadily feeling her own walls beginning to crack. "I think we're healing each other," she said quietly. "And I think that terrifies us both." The truth of those words hung in the air between them as the last light faded from the western sky. Neither of them was ready to acknowledge the growing attraction that sparked whenever they were near each other, but neither could deny its existence. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the night sounds of the ranch and wondering what she was going to do about the feelings that were growing stronger with each passing day. She was still legally married to Marcus Thornfield, still a fugitive from his twisted schemes, still uncertain about what the future might hold. But for the first time since answering that fateful advertisement, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore was beginning to believe that she might actually have a future worth fighting for. The peaceful days at the Harrison Ranch came to an abrupt end exactly 1 week after Sarah's escape. She was helping Emma with her lessons in the afternoon when Jake burst into the house, his face grim with urgent purpose. "Sarah, you need to get ready to leave," he said without preamble. "Now, Ligam." "What's wrong?" Sarah rose from the kitchen table where she and Emma had been working on arithmetic problems. "Riders coming hard from the direction of Cheyenne. 3, maybe 4 horses. Could be anyone, but—" Jake did not need to finish the sentence. They all knew who was most likely to be pursuing Sarah with such determination. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had known this moment would come eventually, but the reality of it still shocked her. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 20 minutes if they stop to look for tracks. Less if they're certain this is where you've gone." Jake was already moving toward the gun cabinet, his movements quick and efficient. "Emma, go pack your school bag. Take your warm clothes." "Papa, what's happening?" Emma's voice was small and frightened, and Sarah's heart broke for the child who was once again watching her world threatened by circumstances beyond her control. "Just some men who might want to cause trouble." Jake said, his tone gentle but firm. "We're going to take Mrs. Whitmore somewhere safe, and then everything will be fine." But Sarah could see in Jake's eyes that he wasn't certain everything would be fine. Marcus Thornfield was not the kind of man to give up easily, and he had both the LOM and superior numbers on his side. "Jake, you don't have to do this," Sarah said quietly as Emma ran upstairs to pack. "I can leave on my own. You don't have to risk—" "No." The single word cut through her protest with absolute finality. "I won't let him take you back to that. We'll find another way." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. In her entire life, no one had ever been willing to risk everything for her welfare. The knowledge that Jake Harrison, this quiet, honorable man, would stand against Marcus Thornfield's wealth and influence for her sake was both humbling and terrifying. "Where can we go?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on practical matters. "I have a friend, Tom Bradley. He's the sheriff in Prescott, about 40 miles northwest of here. If we can reach him, he might be able to help sort out the legal mess." Jake handed Sarah a rifle and a box of cartridges. "Do you know how to use this?" "My father taught me when I was young," Sarah replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I'm not expert, but I can hit what I aim at." Jake nodded approvingly. "That's all we can ask for." "Emma," he called upstairs. "Time to go." They left the ranch through the back pasture, Jake leading them along cattle trails that would be invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the territory. Sarah rode Emma's mare again, while Emma rode double with her father on his big gelding. The pace Jake set was punishing, but necessary too. They needed to put distance between themselves and the ranch before Marcus's men realized they had fled. As they rode, Sarah found herself marveling at the transformation in both Jake and Emma. The quiet rancher had become a tactical leader, reading the landscape with the skill of someone who had learned to survive in hostile territory. Emma, meanwhile, had shed her childish demeanor and become a serious companion, alert to danger and ready to do whatever was necessary to help their escape. "There," Jake said quietly, pointing to a ridge behind them. "4 riders, just like I thought." Sarah looked back and saw the distant figures of mounted men near the ranch buildings. Even at this distance, she could sense their anger and frustration as they realized their quarry had escaped. "Will they follow us?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite her pale face. "They'll try," Jake replied, "but we know this country better than they do. We just have to stay ahead of them long enough to reach Tom. The next several hours tested every ounce of endurance and courage that Sarah possessed. They rode through broken country where a horse could easily step in a prairie dog hole or stumble on loose rock. They crossed streams that soaked them to the skin and climbed ridges that left the horses blowing hard. Always behind them, sometimes visible and sometimes not, came the pursuit. Sarah's admiration for Jake grew with every mile. He seemed to know every trail, every hiding place, every shortcut in 50 square miles of Wyoming territory. When they needed water, he led them to hidden springs. When the horses needed rest, he found sheltered valleys where they could pause without being seen. When Emma grew tired and frightened, he provided comfort and encouragement without ever losing focus on the danger that pursued them. It was during one such rest stop in a narrow canyon where a small stream trickled between red sandstone walls that Marcus finally caught up with them. "Well, well," came a familiar voice from the canyon rim above them. "How touching, the reluctant bride and her gallant rescuer." Sarah's heart sank as she looked up to see Marcus Thornfield and three hard-faced men positioned under the rocks overhead, their rifles trained on the small group below. There was no cover in the canyon bottom, no escape route that wouldn't put them directly in the line of fire. "Marcus," Sarah said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded, "I wondered when you would catch up with us. Did you really think you could steal my wife and disappear into the wilderness, Harrison?" Marcus called down to Jake. "I have resources you can't imagine, and connections that reach farther than your provincial mind can comprehend." Jake positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah and Emma, his rifle ready, but not yet raised in a threatening manner. "She's not your wife," he replied calmly. "Not in any way that matters. You tricked her, threatened her, and imprisoned her. That's not marriage, that's kidnapping." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "The law says otherwise. I have a legal marriage certificate signed by a legitimate justice of the peace. What do you have? The word of a desperate woman and a backwater rancher." "I have this," said a new voice from behind Marcus's position, and Sarah's heart leaped with hope as she recognized the authority in those words. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from concealment among the rocks, his badge gleaming in the afternoon sun, and his rifle aimed steadily at Marcus's back. Behind him came two deputies, their weapons also drawn and ready. "Tom," Jake called out with evident relief. "Thank God." "Got your message through the Jenkins boy," Tom replied, never taking his eyes off Marcus and his men. "Figured you might need some help with this situation." "Sheriff, thank heavens," Marcus said smoothly, though Sarah could hear the tension beneath his polished words. "These people have kidnapped but my wife and stolen my property. I demand you arrest them immediately." Tom Bradley studied Marcus with the steady gaze of a man who had dealt with every kind of trouble the frontier could produce. "That's interesting, Mr. Thornfield, because I've been doing some checking on you since Jake's message arrived. Seems there are quite a few questions about your business practices that need answering." "What kind of questions?" Marcus demanded, though Sarah could see his confidence beginning to waver. "The kind that involve young women who answer your advertisements and then disappear," Tom replied grimly. "The kind that involve forged documents and fraudulent marriages. The kind that 3 different territorial marshals are very interested in discussing with you." Sarah felt a surge of hope so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. Justice. After all the fear and desperation, after all the impossible odds, justice might actually be possible. But Marcus Thornfield was not the kind of man to surrender without a fight. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing," Marcus snarled, his veneer of civilization finally cracking. "And I have legal documents that prove my marriage to this woman." "You can't." "Actually, I can," Tom interrupted, "because while you were chasing Mrs. Whitmore across half of Wyoming, federal marshals were searching your establishments in Cheyenne. Amazing at what they found when they opened your locked rooms and private files." The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications of Tom's words sank in. His entire criminal enterprise had been exposed, while he pursued what he probably saw as his most valuable piece of property. "You see, Mr. Thornfield," Tom continued conversationally, "Mrs. Whitmore wasn't your first victim. There were others, 5 other women who answered your advertisements and then mysteriously vanished. The marshals found evidence of what really happened to them, including letters from family members asking about their missing daughters. Sarah felt sick as she realized how close she had come to sharing the fate of those other unfortunate women. If not for Jake's courage and compassion, she would have simply disappeared into Marcus's network of exploitation and abuse. Marcus's response was swift and vicious. Rather than surrender to the inevitable, he raised his rifle toward Jake and Emma, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "If I can't have her, no one can," he shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. But Sarah was faster. The rifle Jake had given her came up with surprising speed, and her father's long-ago lessons in marksmanship proved their worth. Her shot took Marcus high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering among the rocks. The brief gunfight that followed was sharp and decisive. Marcus's hired guns faced with overwhelming odds, and their employer's obvious defeat chose surrender over a hopeless battle. Within minutes, all four men were disarmed and in custody. As Tom Bradley secured the prisoners, Jake turned to Sarah with an expression of awe and admiration. "Remind me never to make you angry," he said softly. Sarah looked down at the rifle in her hands, surprised by her own actions. She had never shot at another human being before, but when she saw Marcus threatening the people she had come to love, the decision had been automatic. "I couldn't let him hurt you and Emma," she said simply. "Papa," Emma said quietly, tugging on Jake's sleeve, "is it over now? Are we safe?" Jake knelt down to his daughter's level, gathering her into a reassuring embrace. "It's over, sweetheart. Mr. Thornfield can't hurt anyone anymore." But even as he comforted his daughter, Jake's eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected there. Marcus Thornfield's threat was ended. But what did that mean for their future? Sarah was no longer a fugitive, no longer trapped in a nightmarish marriage, but she was also no longer bound to the Harrison Ranch by necessity. She was free to go wherever she chose to build whatever kind of life she wanted. The question was, what did she want? That evening back at the ranch, after Marcus and his men had been taken to jail in Prescott, Sarah sat on the front porch and tried to make sense of the day's events. The crisis was over, justice had been served, and she was finally truly free. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she felt strangely hollow, as if the end of her ordeal had left her without purpose or direction. Jake joined her on the porch as the sun was setting, settling into the chair beside her with a tired sigh. Emma had been put to bed after a supper of celebration and relief, and the ranch was quiet in the gathering dusk. "Tom says the federal marshals will want to talk to you," Jake said quietly, "about Marcus's other victims, about the evidence they've gathered. But he doesn't think there will be any charges against you. The marriage was clearly fraudulent from the beginning." "That's good," Sarah replied, though she felt little enthusiasm for the legal complexities that lay ahead. "Sarah Busham," Jake began, then stopped seeming to struggle with his words. "I need you to know that you're welcome to stay here as long as you want. There's no pressure, no obligation. You've been through enough without having to worry about where you're going to live or what you're going to do." Sarah turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. "That's very kind of you, Jake. But I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely. You have your own life to live, your own future to consider." "What if," Jake said carefully, "what if my future involves you?" The words hung in the air between them, gentle but unmistakable in their meaning. Sarah felt her heart begin to race as she realized that Jake was offering her something she had never dared to hope for. Not just sanctuary, but love. "Jake," she whispered, "you don't have to say that. You don't owe me anything more than you have already given." "This isn't about owing," Jake replied, turning to face her fully. "This is about the fact that I've been happier in the past week with you here than I've been in years. This is about the fact that Emma asks every morning if you're going to stay. This is about the fact that I can't imagine this place without you anymore." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as she heard the sincerity in his voice. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "But Jake, we barely know each other. A week ago we were strangers. Are you sure you're not just grateful for the help I've provided, or feeling protective because of what I've been through?" Jake reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore," he said softly, "I know that you're brave enough to climb down the side of a building in the dark when freedom calls. I know that you're kind enough to help a hurt animal without a second thought. I know that you're strong enough to face down armed men to protect people you care about. I know that you can make Emma laugh in ways she hasn't since her mother left, and that you can make me hope for things I thought I'd given up forever." He paused, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across her knuckles. "Maybe we haven't known each other very long, but I know everything I need to know about who you are. The question is, did you think you could be happy here with Emma and me, with ranch life, with all the uncertainty and hard work that comes with building something together?" Sarah looked out at the land that had become so precious to her in such a short time. The rolling hills, the big sky, the sense of space and possibility that had been missing from her life for so long. She thought about Emma's serious little face and her gradual warming toward the idea of having a mother figure again. She thought about Jake's quiet strength and gentle humor, about the way he made her feel valuable and cherished without ever trying to possess or control her. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I think I could be very happy here." Jake's smile was like sunrise after a long dark night. "Then will you marry me? Not because you need protection or security, but because you want to build a life together." "Yes," Sarah said again, and this time the word came with laughter and tears and a joy so pure it took her breath away. "Yes, Jake Harrison, I will marry you." When Jake kissed her there on the porch of the ranch that had become her sanctuary and would soon become her home, Sarah felt the last of her walls crumble away. This was nothing like the desperate calculation that had led her to answer Marcus Thornfield's advertisement. This was choice freely made. This was love honestly offered and gratefully received. 6 months later, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore became Sarah Elizabeth Harrison in a ceremony that brought together half the territory to celebrate. Tom Bradley served as Jake's best man, Emma served as maid of honor with solemn pride, and Marcus Thornfield served 20 years in territorial prison for kidnapping, fraud, and human trafficking. The ranch prospered under Sarah's efficient management and Jake's careful stewardship. Emma bloomed into a confident, happy child who excelled at her studies and called Sarah Mama with complete naturalness. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and their daughter was asleep, Jake and Sarah would sit on their front porch and watch the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Sometimes Sarah would think about that desperate young woman who had answered a mail-order bride advertisement in a Boston tenement, and she would marvel at the journey that had led her to this place of peace and love. She had set out seeking security and had found something far more precious: a home, a family, and a love that would last a lifetime. "No regrets?" Jake would sometimes ask, holding her hand as they watched the stars emerge in the vast western sky. "Only one," Sarah would reply with a smile. "I regret that it took me so long to find my way to you." And in the distance, the hills of Wyoming would echo with the sound of their laughter, carrying the music of their happiness across the land they had claimed as their own.